Southern California, just entering the 20th century, a land where citrus fruit was the new gold, mined by thousands of farmers who'd migrated from the Midwest to seek their fortunes in the California sun. It was here in 1913, in the tiny town of Yorba Linda, that Richard Nixon was born. His father had tried citrus farming, and the family was now facing one of its hard realities.
The year that Dick was born, January of 1913, it was about the coldest winter they'd ever had, so they just about lost everything.
The small house Richard was born in and where he spent his first 6 years was from a Sears Roebuck kit. It was built by his father, Frank Nixon. He was a man of many skills who'd mastered a number of trades.
My father always said, anything any other man can do, I can do. I may not do it as well, but I can do it if I must.
He was also full of fun, but quick to anger.
Although he was sometimes described as too rough, too tough, sometimes described as being mean, he was not. He had a heart of gold, and he wouldn't turn down charity for anybody who needed it, but he refused to accept it for himself. And that's what made him tick.
In 1908, in Whittier, California, the irrepressible Frank Nixon married the considerably more genteel Hannah Milhouse.
Well, Mrs. Nixon was kind of a saintly woman, a very gentle woman, very modest.
She was the confessor. People would come and tell her everything in the world, and it was private. She kept it.
Hannah Milhouse was a strictly observant Quaker who had come west from Indiana as a young girl along with the rest of the Milhouse family. Whittier had become a center of Quakerism in California, and the Milhouses were soon one of the leading families in town. Richard Nixon spent his first years in Yorba Linda. By 1918, the Nixons had grown to include 3 boys. Richard had an older brother, Harold, and a younger brother, Donald.
They were a strong moral family. They went to church every Sunday, and Hannah was a very religious person.
In fact, they went to church 4 times on Sunday, but out of church they shared the Western Quaker trait of debating with neighbors and each other the politics of the day. It was the way Richard Nixon first gained an interest in the wider world. When Richard was 9, the family moved the short distance from Yorba Linda back to Whittier, by now a large town, but one where everybody still knew everybody else.
There was quite a bit of money in town. Dick didn't have any of it, but between the oil man and the people in the ranching business, it was a very successful little isolated community.
You have to think back 60 years or more, but from Painter Avenue almost to Fullerton, it was solid orange grove, and no business at all except the Nixon country store with a little service station.
In Whittier, Richard Nixon lived a life filled with the diversions of small-town America. And as he'd later explain, the distant whistle of trains set him dreaming of becoming a railroad engineer. As in so many families at the time, the tragedy of an early death struck the Nixon family when Richard was 12. Another Nixon son, Arthur, had been born in 1918, but as a young child he contracted tuberculosis. He died at the age of 7 in 1925. Arthur's loss struck Richard and the family deeply. Hannah would later report that Richard took from the loss a determination to replace his parents' pain with pride in his own success. Frank Nixon saw Arthur's death as an admonition from God. He never again opened his store on Sunday. Working at the store took up much of the teenaged Richard Nixon's time.
Setting up the fruits and vegetables, driving into Los Angeles at 4 in the morning to go to the farmer's market to pick up the produce, getting the produce back, getting it on the shelves. He was very good at it. He could really fluff up that lettuce and make it really look nice and get the carrots and the potatoes and the beets and what have you. And then he'd be off to school, and then he would do his homework and work in the store of the afternoon, late afternoon, and get about 4 hours sleep a night, and get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and drive back into Los Angeles to get that day's produce.
At Whittier High School, Richard showed himself to be an exceptionally bright student and hard worker who excelled at everything he did, and he did just about everything.
Because every organization that Nixon joined, and he joined every one that was available, he eventually became president of it. So he obviously had, if not necessarily a following, he certainly had respect of people. How popular he was is another matter. I think people reacted to him by feeling there's an absence of spontaneity here. This is contrived on his part. All this frenetic activity that he's involved in is not spontaneous. And so genuine friendships came very hard for Dick Nixon. In fact, almost impossible.
Well, I had just thought of him as a very serious person. He wasn't one of the hail fellows well met or standing around on campus looking for something to do. He was focused, knew what he was doing. He knew what he wanted.
During his teenage years, another tragedy struck the family. Richard's older brother Harold, as friendly, outgoing, and popular as Richard was shy and introverted, contracted tuberculosis. When Harold needed further care, Hannah Nixon took him to Arizona for its clean, dry air. For the next 2 years, she tended him and other TB patients there. But his mother's long absences from home tending Harold were very hard, emotionally and financially, on the Nixons. Richard graduated the best all-round student at Whittier High and was given a scholarship to Harvard. But Harold's illnesses had stressed the family's finances to the breaking point. He had no choice. He'd have to stay at home. Richard's dream of going to college in the East was now dashed.
It was a tuition scholarship, but he couldn't afford the room and board out there. That's how poor this family was. Hannah Nixon never had a new dress in all the years that Nixon was growing up. They never went to a restaurant to eat. Nixon lived in sight of the mountains and didn't have any way to get up to them. This was not a rock-bottom, poverty-stricken family. But this was a family in which they ate a hell of a lot more cornbread than not.
Turning down Harvard was one of the hardest blows the young Richard had yet to face. In the fall of 1930, he entered Whittier College. Again, he excelled at his studies and joined everything, including the football team.